Aaron, how did these alleged schemes work?
Well, the schemes, Ryan, are already starting to have an impact. The dominoes are starting to fall. We just got word that Wake Forest is about to fire its volleyball coach because college coaches were among those accused of accepting bribes from this college counselor who would pay them, after the parents paid him, to fake athletic credentials so that certain students were guaranteed admission to their college of choice by coming on as a recruited athlete, when in fact they were not recruited athletes. In fact, many of the students that became admitted to because they purportedly played a certain sport never actually played that sport. You mentioned Lori Loughlin, and according to the criminal complaint that was just unsealed in Boston, she paid $500,000 to make sure that her two daughters got into the University of Southern California on a crew scholarship, even though her two daughters had never rowed a day in their life.
So were these kids taking up spots from athletes who would normally have that spot on the team?
Not only athletes, but just anybody else who had applied to these schools. And federal prosecutors in Boston said that this was not a zero-sum game, and that's the frustrating part. For every student that was admitted because their parents paid some kind of a bribe, there was a student who was rejected from that particular school. And it wasn't just Wake Forest and the University of Southern California. This touched Yale and Georgetown and other elite colleges around the country.
Let me ask you this. You talk about the schools and all of this. We're hearing about the coaches. Were the schools aware of what was going on?
In most cases, the schools were not necessarily aware, although they're coming to find out. We're starting to get in our inboxes now statements from the University of Southern California, from Yale, from Wake Forest. And so the dominoes are indeed beginning to fall. But the schools themselves, we're told, are not targets of this investigation. And neither are the students. In fact, many of them were admitted to these schools not knowing what their parents had done to get them in some cases paying to give them fake athletic credentials, in some cases paying an SAT proctor to make sure that their SAT scores were up to snuff.
So parents, just so I understand this, you have kids whose parents would try to pay this organization to fake these credentials, but would the kids have to show up to practice? I'm assuming they wouldn't because, or at least to the teams, because they wouldn't have known about it.
No, they wouldn't have known. In fact, there was a cut and paste job that's outlined in court documents where the college coaches were paid these bribes in part to literally cut and paste the student's head onto an athlete's body and therefore portraying the student as some kind of an elite recruited athlete when in fact they were not. And so they had no athletic obligation to the school. They just ended up getting in.
Stunning situation. So I understand some people have been arrested. What happens next?
Well, there have been a number of arrests, 50 people arrested, 33 parents, and you mentioned Felicity Huffman and Lori Loughlin, some of the bold-faced names. Federal prosecutors in Boston also singled out, Ryan, the head women's soccer coach at Yale, and said she was paid $400,000 to guarantee a girl a spot on her team, even though the girl had never ever played soccer. And for that privilege, her parents paid this college counselor based in California $1.2 million. The counselor is now pleading guilty. A number of the parents, including Felicity Huffman, have been arrested.
There is one coach who did not take any of the money for himself. The other coaches all took some money for themselves. Some took all of it for themselves, but most, it appears, gave some portion to the school's program and took some for their own use.
Now I hear that, Paul, and I think, I mean, you laugh. It's almost like you can't believe that coaches would do this, especially when so many coaches talk about how important these teams are to do this, to take this money.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to know how some of the coaches put the money back into the program, other than maybe taking some of the participants out for a free hamburger at McDonald's, because there's no other way. You just earmark $30 or $40 or $100,000 for the volleyball program at Harvard or whatever. But I mean, it is outrageous. But I just think it's a symbol of our times. We live in a world that almost anything goes. And I think in the world of Little League baseball, where you're trying to bribe the coach to get your son in the game, it's now my daughter or my son goes to a better school than your daughter or your son, and I think that's really what we have here.
What do you think is the impact on these programs?
I don't think it's going to have a tremendous impact. Listen, if you're counting on the NCAA to solve anything other than what day it is, it's not going to happen. I don't know how they can get near this. I think you'll see coaches fall by the wayside like we're already hearing in the early and embryonic hours of this scandal, but I would be doubtful that it has a dramatic impact, unless this is so systemic that these things start falling out of trees all across the country, and I wouldn't be all that surprised.
Well, I think that's interesting that you say that. You wouldn't expect the NCAA to get involved, but wouldn't they need to be concerned, seeing as this is the biggest story right now, looking at this, wouldn't they need to be concerned and say, let's make sure this isn't systemic?
Yeah, no, they should be, and I think they'll give lip service. I'm sure Mark Emmert right now on his G5 is dictating a statement to some underling back at the home office. But, I mean, just like in this case the other day with the FBI Adidas trial, I mean, the NCAA has done not one bit of independent investigations. They just follow the lead. They follow the big publications, whether it's OTL or Yahoo, or they follow the FBI. But I'm not counting on the NCAA to do very much on their own. They'll leave it up to the schools and hope that the schools fall on the sword, and I think they will.
You know, I hate to ask an idealistic question, but you say this has been happening all this time. Do you think that this news coming out today, what feds are doing right now, do you think it stops it from happening?
No, I don't. Listen, if you have money in this country, and I'm not trying to give a political speech here, okay, and you can get your children into a better school, you will continue to do it. You may just leave out the fact that maybe they have to play sports or really not really playing sports, but just be on the team. So, I mean, there's always a way to get someone in a university in this country today.